Hi everyone. If you're creating models and other content in Power BI, have you ever felt that releasing new content is taking too long? That manual errors in production happens too often? And users are constantly frustrated due to bugs or waiting for new features to arrive? If so, then this session is for you. My name is Nimrod Shalit, a senior product manager in Power BI. And today I would like to present a new tool that was just released a few months ago called deployment pipelines. Deployment pipelines can help BI teams build a better work process so their end users will become more confident and more engaged with analytics. Today, we will start by introducing deployment pipelines. If you are already using the tool or tried in the past, you can skip this part and go grab some coffee. Then we will understand how pipelines can help you, BI professionals, and what you should know to maximize the value from this tool. Later, we will cover our very new general availability announcement. And lastly, some of our future plans for this tool. Let's get started. Our mission at Power BI is to spread data culture across organizations. And so far, we're doing a good job. More and more organizations are betting on analytics, and more users engage daily, using data to impact their decisions and actions. But as scale grows, so does the requirements from business users. More data to be consumed in a single view, or enriched with other data sources. More ways to answer their business questions, from simplistic ways through natural language queries and up to sophisticated AI algorithms to surface hidden insights. And of course, analytics has to meet the highest bar of always available, always updated and fresh data, and no bugs. All these requirements puts a very heavy load on the organization's BI teams. They're enjoying the scale up in usage, but also needs to manage the scale of new requirements for more data, more visualizations, and higher quality. To meet those requirements, BI teams should have a very good process in place for a fast and quality delivery. But a good process alone isn't enough. It needs to be backed by supporting tools. And this is where we come in with deployment pipelines. Deployment pipeline is a new premium tool that enables BI teams and creators build an efficient and reusable process so they can deploy new content updates to end users. BI teams who will implement deployment pipelines can enjoy an improved productivity of their BI developer, who can focus on their core work rather than manual processes or checking 20 times they didn't make a mistake. They'll be able to deliver updates and meet user requirements faster while not compromising on the quality of content. Reducing manual work will reduce the errors that comes along with it. And lastly, it's very easy to get started with pipelines. No technical skills or experience required, and you have a full production-ready pipeline in minutes. Let's see how this actually works. Here, I'm in Power BI's homepage. You can see on the left that there is a new button called Deployment Pipelines. When clicking on it, I can see all the pipelines that I've already created. Let's start by creating a new pipeline and see how fast it goes. I just need to give a name. I can even skip the description, and I'm clicking Create. Now I'm getting to the main diagram view of a pipeline. You can see that it comprises of 3 slots: development, test, and production. Each one should have a workspace within it so content can move between the stages. Right now, the view is empty. And so I need to assign a workspace so I can have content to manage within the pipeline. I'm getting to the assign workspace dialog, and I can see all the list of available workspaces for me to assign. Let's choose one of them. And I can choose now the stage that I want to assign it into. I can choose any one that I want, development, test, and let's go for production. I'm clicking assign, and now you can see that I have a workspace view of the workspace that I've just assigned. I can see instantly what I have here. I can click to see exactly all the content that I have. And now I need to fill the rest of the pipeline so I can start managing content and make updates. From production, if I already have a working production workspace that users are using, I can click deploy to previous stage. Now what is happening, since I'm just doing the first deployment in this pipeline, is that I'm creating behind the scene a new workspace. You can see its name now. It's given an automatic name with the suffix of test, but I can then go and change it. And now I'm copying all the content that I have in production into test. The deployment is completed, and you can see that I have exactly the same content here. So it's created a duplication, and now it also knows the connection between the items. Also notice the green icon here that tells me that there is a full synchronization between test and production that I've just created. Now let's go to a full pipeline and see some of the other features here. This is an already full pipeline with 3 workspaces assigned to all stages, and you can see the content. You can also see that there's a full sync between all stages. It means that everything now is up to date between development, test, and production. Now let's simulate that I'm a BI team and I want to start making changes and updates to the next version of my content in this pipeline. I can choose one of the reports. Now let's say that one of the things that I want to change is to pin some visuals into dashboards in my workspace. Let's take this one. Pin, let's take another one and pin it to different. All right, and now usually I'm making changes to a report within Power BI Desktop, but just for the sake of the demo limitations, I'm going to do it straight here, and we're going to make a very, very small change. Let's take this visual and change the type of visual that we're using. And it's going to look like that. Okay, let's say that we're satisfied with that, and I'm going to hit save. And let's go back to this workspace. And also one of my teammates has worked on a new PBX, so I want to upload it. I'm going to take it for OneDrive. We're using it for version control. And now I have these new PBX inside. Now let's go back. You can see that from the workspace, if it's assigned to a pipeline, it's very easy for me to get back to this pipeline. Clicking here, and I'm going back to the same pipelines that I've shown you before. And now you see that the changes is visible in an instant. And you can see that now the green indicator has been changed to orange. That's very clear because I've added a PBX and I can see it in numbers, but I've also made changes to existing content. And so I have a new button here called compare. And when I click here, I can see an item by item comparison of exactly what has been changed during my work. And so others from my team who goes in can see my changes, or I can see others making changes, and it's because it's instantly being visible through the pipeline. And I can see that I have new content as well as different items that were changed, which is exactly the two dashboards that have pinned visuals and the report that have made a change into the visual. Now I can click deploy to test to deploy everything, or I can go and select one by one to just deploy what I want to deploy, what is my responsibility or the changes I've made, and I know that I can safely move them between development to test. And so others who made other changes can only promote theirs and they don't need to promote everything. So let's just decide that we want everything. And so I'll click deploy to test and I'm getting this warning. This warning tells me that there are 3 items out of the 6 that I've chosen that is going to be overridden, and that's obviously the ones that have made changes. Now that's great because exactly that's what I want to do. But what if there are things that I don't want them to be overridden? For example, in a data set, what if I have a connection that I've made it specifically for test or for production that I want to keep pointing to that data source? So before we make this deployment, let's go and see another powerful feature, and then we'll go back to the deployment. For test and production, you can see this icon here that is called deployment settings. While clicking on that, I can define dataset rules for each of the dataset that I have in that stage. Let's go and choose one of them. So there are 2 options for rules that I can configure: data source rules and parameter rules. The rules mean that once I specify a value, either for a data source or for parameter, it will remain fixed and will not be changed upon any future deployment. So I can connect any of the data set in test or production to point to the relevant databases or to define query parameters, and be sure that for any future changes and updates, it will always keep pointing to the right data, so the end users will enjoy the data that they need. Let's define some rules. Sorry. So let's start with data source rules. I have only one data source and I want to change it. So I'm going to click other, and I'm going to just change the database here to different one, and that's it. And now I want to also change the parameter rules. Let's see what parameters do I have here. The first one I'm going to take is the product color. It's just a filter parameter that shows me only red and black right now. This is what it shows on the development stage. And I want to remove that and just let them know that I want to show everything. And another parameter that I have is the query size limit. This is a more interesting one because this is a parameter defined on the query that limits the amount of rows that I'm retrieving from the database. So in development, where I just want a sample of my data, it is limited to 100. And now let's remove it and say that I don't want any limitation for test. And now I'm going to save it. And I have all those rules defined, and I can go back, and now I can feel that I can safely deploy all the content that I wanted. And now I'm also deploying the data set that I have configured rules on so that we can see how does that apply. I'm going to hit deploy to test. I'm going to get the same message, and now I'm going to hit continue. And it's only copying the 7 items and not everything. In the meantime, let's go back to the development report to see how it looks. And then we can open the same report and test and see how does that apply. So just a reminder, so we've changed this visual, and we also have the product color limit here that is only for red and black, as well as some kind of a metadata visual that shows me the amount of rows that I'm retrieving, which is 100, same as the parameter were. This is in the development stage. Let's wait a few more moments. Here we go. And now you see that the icon, since I've deployed all the changes, the icon is back to green. And now there's a difference between test and production. So I can know now the situation, and you can see here all the changes that were applied. I can also see exactly the timestamp of the last deployment. Now let's open the same report in test. Oh, so I need to refresh first. So let's click refresh to make sure that since I've connected my dataset to a different data, I need to make sure that it's now has the right data. Now let's run for a second. Great, now I can open the same report, and let's see how it looks in test after I've made the change and I've configured rules for the relevant dataset. All right, so first you can see that the change in the visual has propagated into test, exactly what we've wanted to change. However, data is not the same, and that's because we've connected that to different data source and defined different values to the parameters. So the data source now is pointing to the entire world instead of only to Australia. The product color parameter is not limited to only red and black, it's showing all the numbers. And I'm also retrieving all the data from the data source because I've removed the limitation of a 100 rows, as you can see here in dev. So this is a very easy way to see how I can easily propagate changes in the visual or additions to reports and dashboards all the way from development to production, while making sure that in different stages, the relevant users will see only the data that they need. Database production will always be connected to production, test will always be connected to test, and in development, I can do whatever I want. Let's go back to the presentation. Now let's talk about how can that help you, how what we've saw in the deployment pipelines can help data experts or BI professionals. Most of you are probably familiar with ALM concepts and using different CI/CD tools to manage your databases. Yet, if you are a part of a BI team that builds analytics in Power BI, you'll find these tools very valuable. First, this is the only place where you can manage all your Power BI content very easily, track changes and what's deployed by others from your team, and even communicate with each other using Power BI comments or through Teams channels. Using selective deployment, it's easier than ever to let data experts work on the models and data, and report builders build visualizations. Each one can deploy content separately, even if originated from same PBX. Pipelines also support centralized datasets, so there's no problem to connect models and reports from outside the pipeline, or manage it through different pipelines. For those of you already managing PBX files or models with external tools, you can upload PBX files directly to development stage. So you can use Git for version control. pipeline also supports XMLA editing. So you can deploy any changes through CI/CD process to development and promote it to production stage from there. Lastly, deployment pipeline now supports incremental refresh. On top of that, we have added a feature that solves one of the biggest pain points of incremental refresh today. I'll share more info on that later, so stick around. I want to use the next few slides to share some more info on how the tool works, so you can better understand its capabilities and limitations, and make the most out of it. First, let's dive into the deployment operation. When you create a pipeline, you need to add content into it, content that you can then manage within the tool. That's being done by assigning a workspace, as shown in the demo. You can place that workspace in any stage, but you can only place a single workspace. The other two workspaces will be created upon deployment. You can place your assigned workspace in production to maintain all your existing configuration and links, so end users will not fill a thing, and deploy backwards to fill the pipeline. However, once a pipeline is full, the deployment can only move forward from dev to test to production. A user can choose which content to deploy, or he can choose to deploy the entire workspace as content. If it's a new content that is being deployed, it will create a new item in the target workspace. Pipeline will save the connection between items, so it will know what to update later. When you deploy that content again, it will override the existing item in target workspace. I'll talk more on override in the next slide. Also note that you can't deploy a report or dashboard alone if it doesn't have a dataset to connect to in the target workspace. You need to deploy them both together. However, if it's a report connected to an external dataset, it can be deployed and the new report will continue to point to the same dataset outside of the pipeline. Let's talk about what override means. To make it simple for users, we have placed all properties of all items into 3 buckets of behavior. The first one is copy and override. Each property in this bucket will be copied always and will always be overridden. There's no way to control that. For example, if you're adding or changing report visuals, adding or changing report pages, once you click deploy for that report, it will always add or override the same report in the target workspace. You cannot choose one visual to deploy and the other not to deploy. It will always deploy everything and it will always override. The second bucket is no copy and no override. Each property in this bucket isn't being copied and will not be overridden once configured. The most important property here is the data. Data is not copied along with its dataset. It means that if you're now copying and creating a new dataset in test or production, it will be created empty, and you need to run a full refresh to have data within that dataset. However, once you already have a data in the dataset and you're making updates to the dataset, unless it's breaking changes and breaking the entire model, data will be retained so you can deploy without downtime for the end users. They will just see the new updates in front of them once deploy is finished. Also important to note of properties that we do not copy are URL and IDs and the permissions. This means that once an item is created, it has its own URL, its own ID, and you can share it with users. And so they will always have a link that points to the right report or dashboard in the right stage. So production users who are sharing or being shared with reports can always trust that link to point them to the right report. It will not be changed. Same goes for the permissions for each item or for the entire workspace. We do not copy permission. You need to configure them, but once configured, it will not be overridden. The third bucket, which is kind of a hybrid bucket, is a copy with rules. And we've shown that in the demo because it contains only two properties, data sources and parameters. Those properties will always be copied and will always override unless you have configured rules for them, which then keeps a fixed value for any future deployments for the specified data sources and parameters for a given dataset. If we've already mentioned rules, this is one of the most powerful features in Power BI, in pipelines. Let's talk about it a bit more. As I said, a rule always applies to any future deployment. You can set it once and be sure that it will apply as long as it wasn't changed. The beauty of it is that both the data and the connection to data source remain steady upon deployments without any downtime to end users, so you can make much more fast and safe updates without damaging production. Data source rules can only be set for a specific set of data sources. The most common data sources have support, but not all of the 100 plus data sources supported in Power BI. To overcome this, you should define a parameter on the connection and use parameter rules to accomplish the same. One last thing, rules do not apply immediately. They only apply upon next deployment. Keep that in mind that when you click save on a rule, you still need to make a deployment so this rule will be applied. The other option, at least for parameters, is to go to dataset settings and update them to be applied immediately. Let's move on to what's new, and it's a big one. After 4 months of public preview, deployment pipelines are now generally available. I'm so excited that we reached this milestone. It will help more customers be confident to use pipelines and enjoy all its great advantages. Now, what do we bring to the table with the GA announcements? First, it's the GA standards, SLA, accessibility, localization, and it's now also available across all sovereign cloud. We've added additional way to start a pipeline, as you can see in number 1, from within a workspace. By clicking on this new button, workspace admins can create a pipeline with the workspace they are coming from, making it even faster and easier to get started. We've also improved the user experience so that it's easier to understand from within the workspace what's the stage it's assigned to using the tags. And maybe you've also seen that in the demo. Each workspace that is already within a pipeline, when you get to the workspace stage, you see immediately that it has a tag very close to its name, as you can see on the screen, with either development, test, and production. We've also added a button on the same place of the create of viewing pipeline, so you can navigate back and forth between the workspace and the pipeline, making the pipeline page the main place to manage the content. We've also added the menus to all the items and real-time updates if team members are working on a pipeline at the same time. So changes are reflected immediately to everyone. And lastly, the top feature, in my opinion, is the ability to use incremental refresh. I promised I'll explain about it earlier, so here it comes. With deployment pipelines, you can make updates to a dataset with incremental refresh while retaining both data and partitions. Until now, republishing a PBIX with incremental refresh would cause a loss of previous refreshes and data, causing an expensive refresh of all data to run again. Now, with pipelines, you don't need to worry about it anymore. Let's see a demo to better understand this. This is a demo of a pipeline that contains only one data set in one report. You can see it here. This specific data set is a data set with incremental refresh configured, and it's already been deployed to all stages. If I open it here already, you can see that it's part of the production workspace. This is the data that I have of almost 1 year of all the major stocks in S&P 500 with the change in the share price and the volume of that the share has been used at the same day. I can go and I can switch between them. You can see that in the test, it's also the same, and this is also the same for development. Also, I can go in. Oh, you can see here, Apple is being cut off because it's above 100 million, so we need to fix that, right? So now I know that I need to make at least one change to the PBIX, and so I'll go to Power BI Desktop this time. And this is the same PBX that I have uploaded into development, test, and production. You can see that on the desktop, I'm only keeping a sample of the data, about 2.5 months, and not the entire year, right? And I can also configure that through the parameters of the incremental refresh. I can see here, I can make changes, but I want to only work in the desktop with sample data so it will not slow me down. You can also see that the incremental refresh is already configured. And so here, I'm using sample of the data, and when I upload it into the pipeline, it's now starting to refresh, and it's adding more and more data to be updated, and it already has 1 year. You can see the configuration here. It's always updating only 7 days and keeps data for 12 months. Now I want to start making some changes, right? So let's go to the visualizations first. We saw that we have a problem with the volume. It's a y-axis, and yes, the end is fixed, and I want to change it to auto. That's great. Now there are also stuff in that I'm unhappy with in the model. So it's only showing me numbers, and I want to change it to dollars to be more clear. So I'm showing the volume and the adjusted close. Very simple change. I'm going to click on the dollar to change the type. And also the adjusted close. And I also want to have that on only 2 numbers after the dot. Okay, that's great. Let's see how it looks. All right, now much better. Now I can see that it's dollars, and I'm not getting weird numbers on the tooltip. This is much better. Let's see how it looks for Apple. All right, much better. Now let's save this one. Great. Now, since I'm on a development environment, I need to upload from the development stage itself. So let's open the development stage. And I'm going to click. And here it is, just updated. I'm going to open it. Yes, I know. Now, if I open it now in development, this is the development stage, as you can see here. I'll click on that. So let's see if the changes were applied. Yes, you can see that the dollars are here, and Apple, I can see all of the volume. But what happened now, because I've uploaded a PBX, is that now the entire 12 months data has been overridden. This is what is happening today to any workspace when you're using incremental refresh. You have this kind of dilemma between making updates to make the P/X or the model better and losing the data, or the need to have a very, very expensive refresh, right? So if it's only 1 year of data, it's not that expensive, but this is a demo. In reality, you might need to run a refresh of gigabytes and gigabytes of data, which can take days. And in that time, production users will lose the ability to see all the data. But in pipeline, this is only the development stage, so this is perfectly okay. Because if I'm going back to the pipeline, now because I have made changes, I have a change, I did change both in the report and the dataset, and now I can click deploy to test. So now I'm promoting those changes, and remember, test and production also had incremental refresh configured and data for 12 months. So what's important for me is that in test and maybe also in production, I will not lose the data. So let's open that report after the deployment has ended. And you can see now, I'll let it finalize its run, but you can already see that it has a data of the entire year, while the changes both of the model and the report has propagated. I can see the dollars here, I can see all of the volume, and I haven't lost the data. This means that also I can run incremental refreshes in production, make the changes and upload them to dev. And yes, I will lose the data in dev, but dev is not what's important, because in test and in production, data will be retained, and also the partitions. It means that if I also run a refresh now, it will only need to run the last 7 days. It will not need to run an expensive full refresh. And this is exactly what I want to accomplish. And it opens up so many ways now to use incremental refresh in production without worrying and having the dilemma between making changes and upgrading the model and losing the data. Let's go back to the deck. Before we close this session, let's have a peek on what's coming up next. Make sure to check out Power BI's release notes for each semester to be fully up to date on what's coming and when. Our plans for the upcoming semester includes few exciting features. Power BI is about to release a new per-user license that will provide access to all premium features in a much more affordable price. Deployment pipeline is going to be one of those features. If you are a small organization, you can buy the new license to all users and have access to premium in a reasonable price. It's also relevant to enterprises who don't want to buy more capacities only for development and test stages. Now you can buy the new license for your BI team and keep production as the only content in a capacity. Another big step we're going towards is automation of deployment pipelines. We know many of you are already using familiar tools to automate all of your content management and deployment, such as GitHub and Azure DevOps. This semester we'll do the first step in making this integration by releasing API and PowerShell support for the deployment operation, enabling trigger of deployment using APIs or any external tool. And lastly, to complete our full support of the main items in Power BI, we will support paginated reports and data flows to be managed within pipelines. Longer-term goals that we have, which we don't have a timeline yet, is to continue the work on full automation of all deployment pipelines operation available today, so you can fully create and manage content from tools outside of Power BI. native integration with other DevOps, to manage Power BI content through Azure pipelines, and leverage all its DevOps capabilities. We're also planning the ability to assign workspaces to all stages once you create a pipeline. So we are not obligated to create new workspaces if you already have those in place. And lastly, changelog, where you can track what's the content and updates in each deployment to better monitor and track what's happened inside this pipeline. That's all for this session. Hope you find it useful. Here are some additional links to get you started with deployment pipelines. Thank you and goodbye.